We are starting today with what are effectively, in a sense, counter sanctions. Sanctions issued, not only sanctions, but also bans from the country of Russia, issued by the Kremlin against a number of American officials, up to and including Joe Biden. Now, there's not very much that's funny about what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's just very little that's funny in all of this. But the sanctions and banning Biden from Russia, it's a little bit funny, I will tell you. There's a Newsweek piece about this. Russia sanctions Joe and Hunter Biden, which I just find hilarious, Hillary Clinton, and 10 others. President Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden, Hillary Clinton, and 10 other officials have been sanctioned by Russia in response to the sweeping sanctions imposed by Washington, the Russian government announced yesterday. The sanctions bar the officials from entering Russia. Russia's foreign ministry said in a statement translated to English that the measures were on the basis of reciprocity. Now, here, it's actually beneficial that the people that are sanctioned don't need to go to Russia and don't have bank accounts in Russia and don't have assets in Russia. And it makes it all pretty weak. Now, you'll remember that Russian oligarchs, organizations, and entities have been targeted by U.S., Europe, and Canada in response to the Ukrainian invasion by Russia. Russian President Putin himself has been directly sanctioned. The translated Russian Foreign Ministry statement Tuesday said the reciprocal sanctions were the inevitable consequence of the extremely Russophobic course taken by the administration. Others sanctioned by Russia: Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Mark Milley, CIA Director William Joseph Burns, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and a bunch of other people. Now, Jen Psaki was asked about this yesterday, and she basically made the obvious points about it. Take a listen to this.
Got it. And one more on the sanctions
Sure.
that were imposed today by Russia against yourself, President Biden, other top U.S. officials. Do you have a response to that? And how will it impact any of you, if at all?
Sure. I would first note that President Biden is a junior, so they may have sanctioned his dad. May he rest in peace.
Can you imagine? I mean, this is one of those things where, in the United States, what I love what Jen Psaki is saying, because it's almost too on the nose and also irrelevant if you understand how Russia works. Let me explain what I mean by that. On the one hand, in the U.S., if you sanction, Joseph Biden rather than Joseph Biden Jr., you've not sanctioned the correct person. It doesn't matter what your intent was. In some places, there's other places where intent does matter, but it's sort of like a legal question. But we have the general belief in the U.S. where that's a legit technicality where if you don't say that it's junior, it probably applies to someone other than the person it's supposed to apply to. And Jen Psaki's right about that. But the other thing you have to understand is in Russia, they don't care about technicalities like that. If the intention was to sanction Joe Biden, the president of the United States, the fact that Joe Biden is Biden's dad, deceased father, those are not the types of technicalities that courts in Russia care about, unless it's to their advantage, in which case all sorts of technicalities you couldn't even imagine will matter. There's a bunch of interesting books that talk about this, including Bill Browder's book. I believe it's called Red Notice. He's been a guest on the show. Even if you don't like Bill Browder or you don't find him trustworthy, his explanation of how the justice system is a very amorphous thing in Russia are quite interesting. Let's get a little more here from Jen Psaki.
The second piece I would say is that won't surprise any of you that none of us are planning tourist trips to Russia. None of us have bank accounts that we won't be able to access, so we will forge ahead.
Yeah. At this point, I don't think anybody is really looking to go to Russia from American leadership. It's interesting that Hillary's on the list, but no Trump sanction, no Trump ban, also notable and interesting. And of course, this is serious fuel for the conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists are hearing this and they are coming up with all sorts of different hypotheses about why this is the list and why is Hillary on the list. That's a really, really big deal to them. Anything else of interest here? Oh, this is notable. At the same time, Russia does not refuse to maintain official relations if they meet our national interests. So they're making it clear that even though these people are banned and not allowed in Russia, if there were some particular reason why they would want to meet with people or maintain a diplomatic relation, they will do that. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Not a big surprise. Imagine if they included Hunter Biden's laptop on the list. That would be pretty fascinating. Sadly, another American journalist has been killed by Russian troops. This time, maybe journalist isn't the right word, a member of the media, a camera person. And it is getting very dangerous in Ukraine to be a member of the media. Mediaite reporting. Fox News cameraman killed in attack that wounded Benjamin Hall. Earlier in the week, we talked about the injury to Benjamin Hall. We now are learning about the death of cameraman Pierre Zakrzewski, who was killed outside Kyiv in Ukraine. Fox News Media CEO Suzanne Scott announced the tragic news in a note to colleagues. She said Zakrzewski, 55 years old, and Hall were reporting in the village of Orenka when their vehicle was struck by incoming fire. Ukrainian officials say Alexandra Kuvshinova, the producer working with the Fox News team, was also killed in the attack. The notice says, "Dear colleagues, it is with great sadness and a heavy heart that we share the news this morning regarding our beloved cameraman, Pierre Zakrzewski. He was killed in Orenka outside of Kyiv, Ukraine, was with Benjamin Hall yesterday news gathering when their vehicle was struck by incoming fire." The Hill also reporting on this. Fox cameraman killed amid attack in Ukraine. This article mentions a little bit more about Zakrzewski and the degree to which this is crossing party lines. And, you know, I think there's a lot of people may not realize in media, very often the camera people, cameramen, camera women around the world, sometimes they're freelance contractors. I mean, they may technically be employees or they may be freelance contractors or whatever the case may be. But the point is, they very often don't subscribe to the same political views as the media outlet which they are covering. And the understanding is, I mean, listen, regardless, this would be a tragedy. And attacks on members of the media are deplorable and absolutely sickening and disgusting. But some people reacted by saying, well, here's a right winger who got killed. Not that it would make it any less bad. Very often sometimes they're union and internationally, sometimes they're freelance. And that's just neither here nor there. I think an important point to mention is that in general, it's dangerous to be a journalist, not necessarily a camera person, when Russia doesn't like what you're doing. And as dangerous as it has become on a statistical basis in Ukraine so far, we've now had multiple deaths and a number of members of the media injured. You can also look up the Wikipedia article, list of journalists killed in Russia. And they actually have a table that goes by year. And the numbers are quite high. They're in the hundreds for journalists killed in Russia. It is not good. Here is CNN correspondent Scott McLean. CNN, remember, sort of paying tribute to Pierre Zakrzewski.
I should also point out that we learned that a longtime photojournalist, Pierre Zakrzewski, for Fox News, his body was found. He's been killed in Kyiv.
Yeah, that's right. The second foreign journalist to be killed, Pierre was working for Fox News. We understand the correspondent as well is in critical condition, according to Fox. I actually had opportunity to meet Pierre 2 years ago when I was in Kyiv. I can tell you he was extremely popular in the industry. It's a pretty small industry, especially on the road with international journalists. Everybody seemed to know him. I don't usually drink a lot when I'm on the road because we're busy, but I can tell you on our last night, I have a picture with him and we were 3 sheets to the wind because he was just a lovely guy to hang out with, and we were just having a riot hanging out with the Fox guys. I ended up running into him in 2020, a few months later when we were in the lockdown in London where he was living, and I just remember he was really trying to get out the door, he was bored sitting around in London during the lockdown. And so I know that he really loved his job. He really loved the travel. He really loved the adventure. Obviously, this is a tragedy, and it seems like he's universally loved in this industry. And I can tell you from my brief experience with him, he was just a really lovely guy to be around.
Yeah.
So there's the personal tragedy. Someone died here. Someone with a family has died. There's also the reality that, yes, war journalism is not without its dangers. There's no question about it. But it's a small sample. This has been a short engagement so far, this invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And we've, the number of people killed is thankfully low in terms of the raw number. But on a proportions basis, for how many journalists are there and how long it's been, Russia is not taking particular care when it comes to members of the media. And it is getting dangerous enough in Kyiv that a 36-hour curfew has been announced after residential buildings were hit by heavy shelling. So all part of the tragedy. The invasion is a tragedy. The civilians killed, a tragedy. Members of the media killed. It's bad. Members, Ukrainian citizens just defending their country. It's all absolutely horrifying. And by the way, I would say it's also a tragedy when Russian soldiers are sent without a clue sometimes as to what's really even going on, and very often not even wanting or believing that this is a worthy cause when they are killed. I mean, a lot of them are kids as well. So it's all tragedy. Let me know what you think. You can find me on Twitter at @dpacman. We have a packed program for you today. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpacman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpacman.com. The David Pakman Show is a viewer, listener, audience, community-supported program. We have a membership program which you can sign up for at joinpacman.com. We do an extra show every day for our members. We also provide a commercial-free audio and video feed of every single show every day for our members, and it's made available 6 hours before the shows are made public. You can sign up at joinpacman.com. Very easy to do. Takes just moments. And remember, Alex Jones hates the bonus show.
Oh, the bonus show where you want to make money. Everybody else that makes money to fund themselves is bad.
Hard to imagine a better endorsement of the bonus show than the fact that Alex Jones is infuriated by it. All right, this is almost beyond belief. There is video of a meeting at which the Trump riots were planned. Lordy, there are tapes. These are not exactly criminal geniuses, that's for sure. Look at this. Politico reporting. The DOJ has announced a film crew was present at the January 5th meeting between leaders of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. The details provide new evidence of the encounter between the two groups whose leaders played a key role in the breach of the Capitol the following day. They're not sending their best and brightest. Prosecutors say a documentary film crew was present when Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio and Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes met for 30 minutes in an underground parking garage on January 5th. Now, remember, they've both since been arrested and charged. The details revealed in a Justice Department court filing on Monday provide new evidence of the encounter between the two groups, whose leaders played a key role in the breach of the Capitol the following day. Quote, while in the parking garage, Tarrio told another individual he had cleared all of the messages on his phone before he was arrested, prosecutors wrote, in a filing urging a federal magistrate judge to detain Tarrio pending trial. Tarrio further stated no one would be able to get into his phone because there were, quote, 2 steps to get into it. Sounds like 2-step authentication. Prosecutors say after Tarrio left D.C. that night, part of a court ordered that he stay away from the city while facing charges related to his conduct during a December 2020 rally. He traveled to Baltimore. That evening, Tarrio used the phones of associates to make a number of calls and to log back into his encrypted messaging accounts. After regaining access to his accounts, Tarrio assured his men his phone had not been compromised. Reuters first reported on the existence of that meeting and the FBI's interest in it last month. New details suggest Tarrio played a more direct role than previously understood. He's been charged, Stuart Rhodes has been charged, etc. Reuters report, ex-Proud Boys chairman Tarrio ordered detained pending trial in Capitol riot case. This is also from yesterday. A U.S. magistrate judge in Miami Tuesday ordered Tarrio, the Proud Boys chairman, former, to be detained while he awaits trial on charges stemming from the riots. So that is what we call pretrial detention. Now, I've spoken out before about the problems with pretrial detention in the United States. It's often applied unfairly. It's often applied in practice. It ends up affecting those who don't have money for private lawyers. We've been talking about this for a very, very long time. These right-wingers only now care about pretrial detention. I've been talking about it 10 years on the show. They didn't care. They didn't think there was any problem. Now they think there is. But there are videos of the meeting between Tarrio and Rhodes. The people in the videos have been running around for a year, and many of them probably thought they were in the clear. But it appears as though what the feds are and have been doing is following it all up the food chain. It's now hit Stuart Rhodes. It has hit Enrique Tarrio. Who knows the full scope of what's in these videos, but there is a very good chance that there are still very, very serious charges coming for additional people. And I mean, consider, when this all happened back in January of 2021, there was maybe the idea among some that this was all going to be figured out quickly. Some people might be charged and some might end up going to jail, prison, etc. But we are now 14 months in and the charges are still coming, and not even everybody who's going to be charged has been charged. So the upside is we're now at hundreds. It might get to thousands of people who suffer some consequences for their role in the riot. That would be a very good thing. On the other hand, I am still completely not optimistic that really the big insiders, because remember, the real reason that this even got going was the false belief that the election had been stolen from Donald Trump by Joe Biden. Who promulgated that? It was a bunch of Republicans and Donald Trump and Mark Meadows and so on and so forth. Are they going to be held accountable? No, I still don't think that the vast majority of them will be. That's a problem. But if people committed crimes, they should be charged and they should have the book thrown at them. And that does appear to be what's happening. Video of the meeting. Unbelievable. We have been covering a number of the different conspiracy theories, speculations, and reactions to different aspects of what's been happening in Ukraine. This includes the so-called bioweapons labs, biolabs. We've talked about it ad nauseum so far. Today, I'm going to scale up the crazy a little bit for you. Lara Logan is now a Fox Nation host. I don't remember her full credentials. At one point, I believe she was involved with 60 Minutes, and a lot of different things have happened with Lara Logan. But she does appear to have gone completely off the deep end, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And her latest claims, this is just completely outrageous. She said that, first of all, she does soft anti-Semitic propaganda, repeats Russian propaganda, and also starts to take a sort of supernatural, occult, demonic perspective on what is happening. You have to see this to believe it. Let's just jump into the first clip. And by the way, this is all happening on Real America's Voice. So even the venue in which the conversation is happening is whacked. Take a listen. Something is very wrong with Lara Logan.
What troubles me about the moment that we're in is that we have such a selective and a narrow reading of history. You know, President Zelensky may be Jewish, but he's not the only one in this who suffered during the Second World War, whose ancestors suffered, right? I mean, look at Putin. How many relatives did he lose in the siege of St. Petersburg?
So right off the bat, Zelensky may be Jewish. There may be a history of anti-Semitism, but other people have also suffered. Like Putin. Oh, okay. All right. Go on.
People don't know their history. They don't know what made Vladimir Putin. And I'm not I'm not defending him. I don't need to defend Vladimir Putin.
Well, these are sort of the soft apologia that we've seen of Putin. And it's also not that heavily veiled anti-Semitic stuff as well. I mean, what is it? Zelensky's Jewish butt? I mean, what is she even talking about? And then it really goes off the rails. If you think this is wacky, just wait.
My job as a journalist is to try to understand what is the truth here. I don't like being lied to. And we're being lied to on an epic scale. When we're told your only choice is you have to be 100% with Zelensky, who's a puppet, who you can find on the internet in black stilettos and leather pants, with shirtless, doing a spoof Dancing with the Stars kind of entertainment video. That's a mock of a Ukrainian group that does this kind of satanic occult type of music video.
So now she's raising that Zelensky's been involved in satanic occult stuff. That's completely outrageous. The guy was a comedian. Okay. Now you could say, well, a comedian shouldn't be president, or you might say a failed businessman shouldn't be president. Oh, sure, we can have that conversation. But what on earth is she talking about? What on earth is she talking about?
And I mean, Zelensky was selected like so many of our leaders. And honestly, with big tech and with election fraud these days, we don't know how many leaders all around the world have been selected for us. And
now that's another one of these Russell's teapot sort of. We talked about Russell's teapot yesterday. She doesn't actually have any evidence that Zelensky won due to election fraud or due to big tech. She doesn't have any evidence. If she had it, I guess she would present it. Although I don't know, maybe she doesn't even care about evidence. I'm not sure. But it's accepted by Ed Henry and the host. Oh, yeah. And it puts everybody else in the position of having to disprove that Zelensky won due to vote. It's the same thing that they do here.
Actually voted in. But what we do know is that there are increasing problems with technology and the digitization of our world. Because look at what's happening with COVID.
Okay.
Look at what has happened globally. We are fighting the same battles all over the world. To pretend that this war is about Russia and Ukraine is just a barefaced lie.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really important things here. One of the themes, these people all have the same themes, right? One of the themes is you're not being told the truth, and it may not even be possible to know the truth because there's so many people trying to lie to you and all these different things. And it's sort of hard to know that. Number two, making situations that are about something appear to be far more complicated than they are. Now, when you think about the history and fall of the USSR, Vladimir Putin's personal history, the history of Ukraine, the history of NATO, the history of there's a lot there, and there's a lot of history to know. But all of these, it's too complicated to even understand it type analyses are designed to softly make people question whether Russia was wrong to invade Ukraine. And let's go to we'll go to one more clip here. And here, I mean, I cannot emphasize how bonkers this interview is.
I mean, this is on throughout the Ukrainian military. You can see that black son of the occult on their body armor, even on the female soldiers who are paraded in front of the world as being, such an example of Ukraine's independence and spirit and nobility.
It's all satanic and it's all the occult. It's all crazy. I mean, it's half a step before saying there are Ukrainian witches and we've got to burn them.
And they are wearing the black sun of the occult. I mean, this is on.
Yeah. So completely off the rails, Lara Logan. And I mean, listen, every time I talk about her, if I don't mention this, people email me and say I'm wrong to mention it. I'm sorry. If I don't mention it, people say I'm wrong not to mention it. But when I mention it, people say that doesn't really matter. She's out of her mind. Lara Logan was assaulted. I believe it was when she was covering the revolution in Egypt. That's terrible. She may be suffering PTSD. And anything may be going on. Her perspective on COVID has been whacked. I mean, just whacked. And now this kind of like veiled anti-Semitism, Putin apologia, there's satanic occult stuff going on. This is wacky, wacky stuff. And to whatever degree this has to do with what she experienced, I don't know, but I'll put it all out there. We'll have these clips on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. If you value what we do at the David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Today, we're going to be speaking with Justin Gest, who's an associate professor of policy and government at George Mason University and also author of several books, including the forthcoming book, Majority Minority, out next Tuesday. Really great having you on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, David. It's great to be with you.
So when we kind of study and talk about reactionary thinking and ideology, which is often fear-based, it's hard not to stumble across fear being generated with this idea that people different than you are going to take over and become the majority in your area, country, region, whatever. And that's going to be bad, and that'll be dangerous. And, you know, sometimes Tucker Carlson sometimes says dirtier and poorer will be the outcome of that. So this idea of minority, majority groups and the changing demographics has been used for a very long time to achieve political goals. Can you talk a little bit generally to get us into this about the different types of reactions that societies have when we see the racial or ethnic balances shift?
Sure. It's a great question, David. You know, it depends on whether we're talking about this at the individual level or at the societal level. And at the societal level, we know precious little about how big societies, governments respond to great demographic change. And that's really what motivated this book, Majority Minority. Now, at the individual level, there is actually extensive research. What happens when we alert people or simulate great demographic change? Right. And the findings are pretty consistent. People are territorial, they're defensive, they're fearful, they're insecure, and most of it is driven by uncertainty, by the uncertainty of what will life be like under these scenarios. And
uncertainty generally comes with the fear that it might not be so good, right? I mean, uncertainty taken in a sort of literal way could just mean we don't know. But oftentimes uncertainty is associated with, well, that sounds like it could be bad.
Well, it takes a special type of human, I think, to sort of embrace uncertainty. You
Yes.
know, generally, you know, human reactions to uncertainty are going to be fearful because of the insecurities associated with it. You fear what you don't know. You know, there are some people who seize the future, who seize the prospects of uncertainty. But yes, generally, fear is one of the primary emotions, if not just anxiety or discomfort.
Are there societies that have been able to kind of embrace demographic shifts that are significant without significant conflict?
So embrace is a strong word. I think that's actually a standard that I don't think we even need to necessarily meet. I think what we really are looking for are societies that can foster and cultivate a culture of coexistence. You know, and so my work is really concerned about whether societies pivot towards conflict or towards coexistence, because there's always going to be some degree of backlash, some degree of discomfort. And I find that to be universal in all the different societies that I study that have already undergone a majority-minority transition. And by that I mean where the majority ethnic or religious group loses its numerical advantage to one or more minority groups. And in those situations, you can always expect some degree of conflict, some degree of anxiety. But the question is whether societies are resilient and can redefine who they are in order to evolve with the changing composition of their people.
So can you give us some examples of where it's gone on the better side and on the not so good?
Sure. So I study 6 countries, 6 societies really carefully in this book. And 2 societies really pivoted towards suppression of minorities. The most overt kind of suppression takes place in the Middle East region, and I study Bahrain, a small island off the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, where you effectively have a sort of second-class system for immigrants, but also a second-class system for people of a different religious sect than that of the ruling royal court and party. Alternatively, you can look at Singapore, which is another society that is characterized by suppression, but in a far more subtle way. Singapore is concerned with evolving into a greater sort of civic identity, but in its policy making and the way it governs, it actually reinforces ethnic divisions between its people. Now, if you take a look at some American examples, so Hawaii, which many people obviously associate as America's 50th state, Hawaii was previously an independent kingdom. And when it was an independent kingdom, before it was forcibly annexed by the United States in 1893, Hawaii was actually a very multi-ethnic and majority-minority monarchy. And in that society, Hawaii actually embraced many of these newcomers and actually facilitated intermarriage among them. Now, that's not to say there wasn't some nationalism, there wasn't some backlash, there was. But there was a sort of greater understanding of what it means to be a native Hawaiian, and that it could be something that was shared and bestowed upon someone. That really took on new meaning in the 20th century after Americans took over the archipelago, because the Americans put in a very strong assimilationist regime that basically treated any person of color, any person who was not white Anglo-American, as someone to be dominated in a sense. And so what you saw was a lot of intermingling among Hawaiians with people who were previously thought of as immigrants, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Filipinos. And that intermixing created a reconception of what it means to be Hawaiian in the future.
That's interesting. And there, it's very popular among some in the United States to say Hawaii is just a mess, and they give different reasons why. But not often cited is this. I mean, it's interesting. You would think, because Hawaii is a blue state, typically votes for Democrats, you would think that the right might have wanted to seize on multiculturalism as the reason why Hawaii is a mess economically, or whatever it is that's often stated. But maybe it's not even necessarily that well known a story in the United States. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think of Hawaii as a mess at all. I think of it actually as a paragon in many ways. The way that they have been able to embrace demographic change over the course of their history to broaden the understanding of what it means to be Kanaka, to be a native Hawaiian, is really actually exemplary for how I think we want to evolve the civic identity of what it means to be American.
Very generally speaking, top level, there's the idea that in the United States, the way the political divisions are, the left tends to be more accepting of demographic changes, while the right tends to be more fearful and critical of demographic changes. Can you flesh that out a little bit more in terms of whether that general assessment is always or mostly correct, and maybe some of the exceptions or kind of strange interplays to this perspective?
Sure. It wasn't always true, particularly when the left was associated with unionism, which, historically speaking, we're talking 80 to 100 years ago, was actually relatively closed and kind of reproduced a lot of the social and cultural inequities in American history. But certainly in the contemporary moment, that's true. Generally speaking, the left not only embraces demographic change, it almost anticipates it. With the election of Barack Obama, many Democrats crowed about demography being destiny, and how this was the path to electoral victory forevermore after. And certainly Republicans have not just, I think, fear demographic change, but they've actually leaned into that fear and allowed it to consume much of its politics until now. In many ways, the Republican Party is a very nostalgic party right now, yearning for an earlier period in American history, that when they could make America great again. And so, in light of that demographic, the relationship with demographics, I think that is generally the case. But it's also been reinforced by our politics. Ever since the Democratic Party really moved to the center economically and embraced kind of greater neoliberalism, the real differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the United States are principally on cultural issues right now. Right. Certainly there are economic differences, but the real, gaps are on cultural matters. And a lot of that is about how you treat minority groups, whether they're minorities because of their sexuality, because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, whatever it is. Generally speaking, that is where you see the greatest kind of rift.
Yeah, it seems even things like wanting a citizenship question on the census or the focus on critical race theory, to the extent that any of the people focusing on it understand what it is. These things seem to be not so indirectly related to exactly these same issues we're talking about.
Oh, I think you're being modest. They are directly related to
Okay.
the politics of demographic change. Absolutely. One of the greatest dividers, but also uniters in the course of history of great demographic change and majority minority transitions is the socialization of youth. How we actually educate our young people going forward, and our schools, the sort of engines of integration and upward mobility together. Are you integrating your schools, and are you learning a common language and moving forward together, or are you going to have debates over what we teach in schools? In many ways, textbooks have actually have a long history of being debated, whether they recognize the contributions of minorities over history, how you treat historic inequities, and perhaps the inconvenient truths of the country's history. It's quite common. And then, with regard to census questioning, that's a matter of power. When you are excluding, people from a population count, you're also excluding them from power. And so these questions are integral, and they're produced by the fraught politics of demographic change.
Can you give some other examples of the sort of battles that are being had? So we've got the citizenship question, critical race theory. You've talked about textbooks and how history is taught. There's let's make English officially the one official language of the United States. What are some of the other kind of ways in which we can see this battle fought?
Sure, you can see it in the battles over culture, over music, and over art, and over sports. I think back to Colin Kaepernick's effective cancellation from the NFL when he was taking a knee before the national anthem in protest of police brutality and discrimination. I think of the battles over Confederate monuments and the desire to protect them.
Right.
You can also look at the world of commerce. Do we see racialized poverty, or do we see the marketplace as a place of interdependency? The politics of affirmative action in whether it's education or employment. All of these are very much related to demographic change and how we manage it.
So there's there's sort of empirical questions about, is the demographic change happening, and what data points do we have, as you've researched in the book, about other places that it's happened? That's one side of it. There's also the reality that for a lot of people, this rhetoric really resonates. And some, at least, of Donald Trump's rise to power was, Mexico's not sending its best, China's treating us very unfairly, et cetera. Muslim terrorists are coming up through the U.S.-Mexico border. MS-13 is being, quote, released into the community, all of this different stuff. It seems very politically effective, and I'm curious your thoughts on how can it be diffused so that it's not so politically effective, or is there something visceral about it that just works?
Sure, there is something visceral, but it can be defeated. And, politicians and public officials more broadly, including even business leaders and civil society leaders, have to become more adept at calling out fear-mongering for what it does. It divides. And if we are going to survive as a nation, if we are, and this is the most nationalist thing I think I can say, is you want to survive as a nation. And if you want to survive as a nation, you have to cultivate some degree of solidarity and unity. And when you have, politicians trying to profit in the short run to win elections, with divisive rhetoric that doesn't have a huge evidentiary basis, we're all going to lose. And so I think that, the opponents of this kind of fear-mongering have to call those things out. That, people like Donald Trump are trying to divide American society, which weakens us in the future. It weakens us economically. It weakens us socially. And so I do think that that's the way forward. But complementing that idea is you can't just tear down the opposite side's tactics. You also have to have a strategic vision yourself. And that's where the creativity comes in. We have to actually cultivate an understanding of who we are as a country in a way that evolves from the historic understanding of a white mainstream. It has to be one that is not necessarily hitched to race or ethnicity or religion, but one that's about a civic sense of belonging, a civic sense of purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I guess we would benefit from having sort of like some kind of a PR consultant help with this conversation. But, you know, when they say immigrants commit more crime and they're taking our jobs and so on, I mean, it's easy in a sense to say that stuff's not true. And here we have all the studies, and native born Americans commit crime at a higher rate. And why wouldn't they? They don't have a fear that they're committing crime in a different country. You know, we can do all that stuff, but it just seems like you're kind of, you know, pushing a boulder up a mountain in a sense, because it's always tougher to interject facts when the emotions work so well.
Sure. Well, look, we have to invalidate these falsehoods, you know, when they're being made. We can't let them stand because they shouldn't stand. You know, they're completely false. And in some cases, they're just exaggerations. In other cases, they're absolutely false. But that's a negative strategy. You have to have an affirmative strategy, too.
Right.
And, you know, whether it's a PR agency or just some visionary,
right.
Have to work as a country, I think, as a people with a million leaders, not just one, who is thinking clearly and strategically about what holds us together as a country, what holds us together as a nation.
And what's the best argument? Is it basically this country is built on people from all over coming here and contributing what they have to contribute, and we almost all of us are here for that reason? And I mean, I don't even know. I'm kind of thinking out loud here about what is that positive vision.
Sure. Well, let me give you some fodder, and, you know, we can keep the conversation going offline, you know, and all of you can continue to think about this in the shower and, you know, tomorrow morning. There's some enormous advantages that the United States has in reconceiving who we are. You know, first off, we are a country where everyone has some kind of immigrant story. Even Native Americans these days are heavily intermarried with people of immigrant origin. And so almost every single American is touched somehow by a journey to this country. And that is something that is remarkably unifying. Secondly, we have a really high rate of intermarriage and mixed ethnicity, mixed religion children being born right now. In fact, actually, the rate of mixed race people has grown by 300%. That's threefold over just the last 10 years, which is blurring the boundaries between people that can otherwise be used to divide us. And so we also have a very strong civic idea of what it is to be an American. And so these are all advantages, I think, in crafting that new American story that other places simply don't have, that rich history and heritage of immigration that continues into the future. And so in many ways, America is not one static thing. And it's a fool's errand to try to create something monolithic. It's just not who we are. We're an evolving place. We're an idea. We're a country that is constantly in motion, always under construction. Yeah. And I think that our common story really comes through in our common struggle and the idea that everyone wants to dream.
Yeah, the reality that race and ethnicity are also, just on a very practical level, increasingly blurry due to what you're talking about. That's an interesting factor as well. The book is out next week, March 22nd. The book is Majority Minority. We've been speaking with the author Justin Gest, who's also a professor at George Mason University. Really appreciate your time today, Justin. Thank you.
Anytime, David. Thank you.
Follow us on social media, interact with the David Pakman Show community, see exclusive content, see when we're taking calls live, and stay up to date on other big show announcements. We post daily. Find us on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and TikTok. You know, on this show, sometimes we'll look at the wacky and zany and kooky things that right-wingers say, and we'll laugh and we'll say, oh, it's so silly and it's so dumb, but we don't necessarily always worry for the future of humanity and the United States and our legislative bodies on the basis of, you know, every random thing that Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever necessarily says. I have an example today of something for you that does make me really worried about the future of American democracy, quite frankly. Because of the level of ignorance that it shows, combined with a sort of brazen confidence despite that ignorance, and the reality that this may be someone who is going to be one of only 100 senators in the United States. Herschel Walker is a Trump-endorsed Republican Senate candidate running in the state of Georgia. And Herschel Walker recently asked, if there's evolution, if evolution is real, and we humans, Homo sapiens, evolved from apes, why are there still apes on the planet? If the apes evolved to become humans, why are there still apes? We're going to look at the video in a moment. There are more than 331 million people in the United States. Only 100 at a time get to be members of one of the most powerful legislative bodies in the country, the United States Senate. One of those 100 might be someone who questions the truth of evolution because there are still monkeys on planet Earth. Let's take a look at the clip. This is genuinely depressing. It really brings me, I have fear and despair because of this. I have no pleasure. This is not fun.
Here, that means somebody up there had to say, let there be light, that the earth started, and then he had to put someone there on earth. Because remember, Adam was there. Remember, Adam came there, then Eve came. So somebody had to start it out. So that means it had to be a God. Because it didn't just some bomb blew up and it started out. And then I'll tell you something.
Now, we're going to get to the really crazy part. This idea that, listen, if there was some first human, here's the first human, because you start this is not new stuff. We're treading on very worn ground here. The idea that you sometimes hear from creationists is, well, okay, listen, I came from a human mother, and my mother came from a human mother, and my grandmother came from a human mother. And so if you just follow that, at some point there was the first human mother, and therefore that person must have been created like that by a god or higher power. And of course, when you understand the slow process of evolution and you understand how that works, you realize that the premise is wrong. It's logical to think if ad infinitum, it was my mom and her mom and her mom and her mom and her mom, and it was just all modern humans, right? You might end up saying, well, I mean, somebody must have designed and created that first human. But we understand that that's not the case. So this alone we could spend an hour on. But let's get to the really wacky part that's getting a lot of attention.
As I heard, and I think about this, because at one time, science said man came from apes.
It's not at one time, by the way, but yeah, okay.
Did it not?
That's when you go to the science. Every time I read or hear that, I think to myself, you just didn't read the same Bible I did.
Well, this was interesting, though. If that is true, why are there still apes? Think about it.
You know, now you're getting too smart for it.
No. Think about this. We have an evolution that is, we've gotten so intelligent that if that is true, why are there still apes? And then the conception of a baby. Let me tell you, science can't do that. They still trying to do it, but it can't because there had to be a God. So when God came...
Okay. Now, this is not actually a crazy question. I mean, you go to third or fourth grade when... I think that's when kids start being taught about evolution. There are lots of curious, naive, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed 8- and 9-year-olds who would say, hey, but if we came from apes, why are there still apes? Didn't the apes become human? And of course, there's an answer. Humans did not evolve from a modern living ape, like a modern chimpanzee. We evolved and descended from a common ancestor of apes. We share a common ancestor. That's the best science we have right now, which lived and died in the distant past. And that means we're related to other apes, and we and those other apes came from an earlier ape of some kind. Now, that's an 8 or 9-year-old that would ask that. Imagine if Herschel Walker becomes a senator. I mean, really think, we have 331 million people in this country to pick from. Some of them are kids, so we're not literally. Okay, but we've got hundreds of millions of people to choose from. How do we solve really serious problems in this country? Inequality, poverty, education, hunger, climate change, when we have it's just 100 people in the Senate, and at least one of them, there might be others in the Senate who believe the same stuff. But when one of your 100 is a senator saying, if evolution is real, why are there still apes on planet Earth? How do we solve problems if that's the case? We can't. And so when we wonder, man, why politics is so log jammed and we're not getting anywhere, and it's these trivial arguments about stupid stuff and people getting fined for not wearing masks and people who think the vaccines modify your DNA. How we have 331 million people. The Senate has 100 members representing those people. And a guy who's saying, if evolution is real, why are there still monkeys on Earth, has a genuine shot at becoming one of those 100 and is endorsed by former President Donald Trump. It doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well, and it is not funny. It stopped being funny a while ago. The Republican National Committee is now joining Donald Trump and others in desperately trying to keep their own email records away from the January 6th committee investigating the Trump riots of 2021. Once again, this is not the behavior of parties who have nothing to hide. CNN report, RNC tries to stop 2020 email communications data from going to the January 6th committee on Wednesday. The House Select Committee investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol is poised to receive data from the Republican Party's email communications platform, Salesforce, and the Republican National Committee rushed to court last night to try to block it. The development is the latest to emerge about the House's aggressive pursuits, reconstructing political misinformation after the 2020 election that contributed to Trump supporters storming the Capitol on January 6th. The RNC alleges that the House subpoenaed a Salesforce seeking information about election communications, including those related to former President Trump, quote, would give the Select Committee unprecedented access to the RNC's internal political strategies and to private personal information regarding supporters, practically adding reasons that their emails should be investigated. What were they telling their big donors right on the eve of the January 6th Trump riots? Political strategies, which they want to hide, are exactly what got these people where they are now. Political strategies that involve lying about election results, intimidation, calling for violence, spreading fear and propaganda through right-wing media, trying to invalidate voters, purge voter rolls, change vote totals, send alternate bogus slates of electors. All of those things are why we're in this mess. And so the January 6th committee is 100% right to say, hey, maybe they were talking about that stuff in their email communications. And if there isn't illegal stuff in there, they don't really have anything to worry about. I mean, everybody knows what the strategies are. You think we're going to learn about new strategies by looking at their emails? We know what the strategies are. What we might learn is that they were openly plotting and communicating about them with donors and other higher-ups. The article goes on. Last week, the RNC filed a lawsuit against the House committee, complaining about the Salesforce subpoena's breadth, but that lawsuit was unlikely to succeed as it was aimed only at the committee, not at Salesforce, and there is no emergency mechanism to fast track it in court. So Salesforce was planning to turn these records over. But now the RNC has added Salesforce to the lawsuit. Will they ultimately get those records? I don't know. We'll find out, very soon. But think of the irony and think of the hypocrisy and the double standard. The DNC emails were hacked. You might remember that. And Putin told Trump very strongly that it wasn't Russia, and Trump believed him. Okay, whatever. But the DNC emails were hacked. And of course, Republicans didn't take the high road. They didn't say these were incorrectly released. We're not going to use them. They immediately used those emails for propaganda. And here, they are saying, well, no. It would be completely improper. We're not talking about hacking. But they're acting as though this legal mechanism is worse than the hacking. They're like, no. It would be inappropriate to use that legal mechanism to get these documents from us. And the documents shouldn't be released. That would be wrong. But when documents were hacked, they were fine to use them and publicize them, et cetera, et cetera. And this is, to be fair, both sides do this, not to the same degree, but both sides, when there are documents that are made public, if you don't like the content of the documents, you focus on the impropriety of them being made public. If you like the content of the documents, you just focus on the content. Democrats and Republicans, they all do this, but they're not as hypocritical to this degree. If they did nothing wrong, they should have nothing to hide. And it's more than that. They should want to clear themselves of any wrongdoing. Even if their strategy gets out to the committee, they should be eager to prove we were not involved in anything untoward or potentially against the law. Now, what do I think is potentially going to be exposed by these documents if they are released? On today's bonus show, we're going to talk about what's going on with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas. Ginny Thomas, we now have learned, attended one of the January 6th events. She attended the January 6th rally before the attack. She wasn't at the attack, but she was at the rally before the attack. And Clarence Thomas has recently been making statements about, we don't want the Supreme Court to become political. I am suspicious that part of what is now the kind of next ring in these concentric circles around the Trump riots is something that relates to Ginny Thomas and thus has the potential to pull in Clarence Thomas. And we're going to talk about that a lot more on today's bonus show. They've gotten away with a lot of shenanigans for a very long time. And the January 6th committee is right to go after these email communications, and let's hope that they get them. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's kind of a funny tongue-in-cheek voicemail, but it's also very accurate. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David. I think it's about time that we start calling these right-wing nuts what they really are. Communist sympathizers.
Right. Now, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, I mean, Russia is not at this point what we would call a communist country by most definitions, although there are people who would still say its guiding principles are still those same communist principles of the USSR. But the point is a good one, which is the right spent decades at this point building the story that the American left, just kind of like basic Democrats, are socialists, Marxists, and or communists. But it is actually the right that, through Donald Trump being enamored with these right-wing authoritarian, dictatorial authoritarians, has ended up being the bigger supporters of those with communist leanings, for lack of a better term. Good luck explaining the double standard to them. We've got a great bonus show for you today. The Senate has approved a bill to make daylight saving time permanent. Do we like this? And will it actually happen? We'll discuss. Idaho is now copying the Texas anti-abortion law. And this is exactly what we expected, and they're doing it. We will talk about that. And yes, Ginny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, was at the January 6th rally that preceded the January 6th Trump riots. We will talk about what we know, and we will talk about how this may end up connecting to the current January 6th committee investigation of those Trump riots. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show.
Oh, the bonus show where you want to make money. Everybody else that makes money to fund themselves is bad.
Very dangerous bonus show, if you believe Alex Jones. I consider it an absolute delight. Sign up at joinpacman.com. You'll get instant access, and I will speak to you then.